It's the homestead dream so many of us picture, isn't it? You step onto the porch in the cool, crisp morning air, a steaming mug of coffee in your hand. You open the coop door, and out comes a cheerful flock of clucking chickens, scattering across the yard like little feathered jewels. They wander through the green grass, nibbling clover, chasing grasshoppers, and seemingly living the perfect chicken life. It looks peaceful, rustic, almost like a Norman Rockwell painting brought to life. But now let's talk about what often happens in the real world. If you've been free-ranging chickens on a small property, especially anything under 2 acres, that beautiful picture can quickly turn into a muddy, expensive, chaotic mess. Because those happy little birds aren't simply wandering around peacefully, they're eating the expensive organic seedlings you planted yesterday. They're scratching the mulch you spent Saturday spreading neatly around your garden beds, straight onto your walkways. And they're leaving those unmistakable green and white calling cards across your porch, your children's play area, and even your tractor tires. And perhaps the most frustrating part comes every month when you walk into the feed store, spend $50 on another bag of commercial grain, and realize that after all that destructive free-ranging, your feed bill hasn't dropped by a single dime. But what if there were a better way? What if your chickens could still enjoy fresh greens, wild insects, and much of the natural freedom associated with free-ranging, while also helping build your soil, protecting your garden, and cutting your feed bill by as much as 80%? Welcome back to Farmyard Care. Today, we're putting the free-range myth aside and looking at the connected system you can build instead. This is managed movement. Let's get into it. Part 1. The romantic illusion versus the muddy reality. Let's begin with the uncomfortable truth that many chicken keepers hesitate to admit because we've all fallen in love with the image of free-ranging. It looks natural. It feels right. But on a small property, chickens are not perfectly efficient little lawnmowers that quietly move across your land and distribute fertility evenly wherever they go. They're much more like tiny, highly focused feathered dinosaurs. Their natural instinct is to scratch, peck, dig, and disturb the soil. And when there are no boundaries, they usually don't wander off toward the distant corners of your acreage. Instead, they return to the same 3 or 4 favorite locations day after day. Usually, that means your porch, your flower beds, and the first 10 feet of ground surrounding the coop door. After only a few months, those heavily used areas can be stripped of nearly every living plant. The grass disappears, leaving behind dry, compacted patches of bare dirt. And because so much manure becomes concentrated in such a small area, the soil can become overloaded with nitrogen. Instead of gently fertilizing the grass, that concentrated manure can burn it, leaving dead areas that may take years to recover. Then there's the garden. Maybe you've spent an entire afternoon carefully planting a beautiful row of delicate heirloom lettuce or spinach seedlings, only to watch a dozen chickens march through the bed and scratch everything into oblivion in less than 15 minutes. It's heartbreaking. But destroyed vegetables aren't the only problem. When chickens are allowed to roam freely everywhere, eggs can end up scattered across hidden nesting spots under blackberry bushes, inside woodpiles, or buried somewhere in tall weeds. You may lose a large part of your egg harvest simply because you can't find it, while wild birds, rodents, and other pests happily discover those hidden nests before you do. And perhaps the biggest risk of all is predators. Free-ranging can feel like playing Russian roulette with your flock. Wild dogs, foxes, raccoons, and hawks are always watching for an opportunity. One day, you have 10 healthy laying hens wandering across the lawn. The next day, you may find nothing but feathers because a hawk took advantage of an open, unprotected space. So why do so many of us continue doing it? Because we assume the only alternative is locking our chickens inside a dark, smelly, permanent run where they live an unhappy and unnatural life. But that's a false choice. The real answer is learning how to control where your chickens move and when they move there. After all, why pay the entire cost of keeping your flock when you can put their natural behavior to work for you? Part 2. The core philosophy of managed movement. The secret behind a productive, affordable small homestead is connection. On many modern properties, almost everything operates separately. The vegetable garden sits in one corner. The chicken coop is somewhere else. The compost pile is hidden away behind another building. And the feed your chickens eat comes from a store several miles down the road. Each part becomes another separate chore, another separate expense, and another separate problem to manage. In a disconnected system, chicken manure becomes waste deposited in the wrong location. Their scratching becomes a destructive force inside the garden, and the leftover material from your garden simply gets tossed onto a stationary compost pile where it sits and slowly decomposes. Managed movement changes that relationship by connecting those separate pieces into one self-feeding cycle. Instead of treating everything independently, the output from one part of the homestead becomes a valuable input for the next. Once we control where the chickens go and when they arrive there, the very behaviors that once caused destruction can become useful farm labor. Their powerful feet can help till and weed garden beds. Their nitrogen-rich manure can fertilize soil exactly where future crops will grow. And their enormous appetite can help intercept weeds, insects, grubs, and other pests before those populations have a chance to explode. This isn't simply a theory. It's the philosophy of multi-tiered connected design. The idea is simple. There should be as little wasted space and wasted energy as possible. If one part of the system isn't helping feed the next part, we redesign the relationship. And one of the greatest advantages of this approach is flexibility. The same basic idea can work whether you keep 4 hens behind a suburban home or 40 chickens on a small family farm. So let's begin with the first piece of the system, something you could start building as early as this weekend. Part 3. The chicken tractor method. The first foundation of managed movement is the chicken tractor. A chicken tractor is simply a lightweight, floorless mobile enclosure that keeps your birds contained while still allowing them direct access to the grass and soil underneath. Instead of giving them unrestricted access to the entire property, you put them precisely where you want their work to happen. The classic design, refined by pastured poultry pioneers such as Joel Salatin, is approximately 12 feet long, 8 feet wide, and 2 feet tall. One half is protected with corrugated metal to provide shelter and shade, while the other half uses wire mesh to bring in sunlight and fresh air. If you have a smaller garden or only a family-sized flock, the same concept can easily be scaled down. A 6 by 10 foot or 8 by 8 foot tractor made from lightweight 1 by 3 furring strips with a tarp can be surprisingly inexpensive. Because the structure stays low to the ground, it handles strong winds well, and its lightweight means a single person can move it without much trouble, even a child. But simply owning a chicken tractor isn't enough. The real question is how you use it to feed the flock while preparing your garden beds at the same time. Here's the sequence. About 3 to 4 weeks before you want the chickens working on a particular garden bed, plant that area with a fast-growing, nutritious cover crop. Buckwheat works especially well because it can establish itself in only about 21 days. Crimson clover is another strong choice because it pulls nitrogen directly from the atmosphere and brings it into the soil. Once that cover crop becomes thick, lush, and green, move the chicken tractor directly onto the bed. Then allow your flock to stay there for approximately 2 weeks. During that period, the chickens eagerly consume the nutrient-rich greenery. They scratch through the root zone looking for pest larvae such as cutworms and grubs. At the same time, they deposit nitrogen-rich manure directly onto the soil where you need fertility. Once you move the tractor to the next bed, look at what has happened behind it. The first bed has been cleared, the weeds are gone, the soil has been fertilized, and the area is ready for your next vegetable crop. There's no hand weeding, no heavy rototilling, and no money spent buying fertilizer from the store. Your chickens did the work, found part of their own food, and saved you hours of exhausting manual labor. Part 4. The legendary Chickshaw 5.0. But suppose your flock is larger. Maybe you keep 20, 30, or even 40 laying hens, and you want a mobile coop that one person can realistically move across uneven pasture, slopes, and rough ground. That's where the legendary Chickshaw 5.0 comes in. Designed by permaculture expert Justin Rhodes, the Chickshaw approaches mobility in a very clever way. Its mechanical design is inspired by the traditional Asian rickshaw. 2 large 26-inch flat-free wheels are mounted directly beneath the center of gravity of the structure. Because of that positioning, the wheels support almost 95% of the coop's weight. When you lift the handle at the front, you're barely lifting the weight of the structure itself. That means one person can move a substantial mobile coop, capable of housing 40 chickens using only one hand. But mobility wasn't the only problem this design was intended to solve. Justin also designed the chickshaw around one of the least enjoyable jobs in chicken keeping, cleaning manure from the coop. The Chickshaw 5.0 uses a strong 1-inch wire mesh floor. At night, the chickens sleep on roosts positioned directly above that floor structure. Their manure simply drops through the mesh and lands on the pasture beneath the coop. Instead of becoming a cleaning job, it immediately becomes fertilizer. You don't need to repeatedly shovel manure from a dirty coop floor. The entire design follows the same multi-purpose approach. The entrance door also functions as the ramp, making it simple to close the flock safely inside at night and release them again in the morning. The roof is hinged for easy access, and the removable galvanized towing handle can also be used to support the roof while it's open. For nest boxes, the Chickshaw uses ready-made plastic milk crates that slide into a nesting frame at the rear. Each one can be accessed separately from outside, allowing you to collect clean, fresh eggs without stepping inside the coop. Even the space underneath serves a purpose. The height created by those large wheels forms a naturally shaded shelter where chickens can dust bathe, escape the summer sun, and find some protection from aerial predators. The entire system is simple, minimal, and remarkably practical. Part 5. The Chicken Chunnel. Now let's look at one of the most useful connectors for suburban backyards and small garden layouts. The chicken chunnel, short for chicken tunnel. A chunnel is a narrow, enclosed wire passage connected directly to your coop or chicken run. Instead of allowing chickens to enter every part of the yard, the tunnel guides them towards specific locations where you want their scratching, foraging, weeding, and pest control behavior. At the same time, your primary vegetable beds stay safely out of reach. The concept became popular through creative backyard chicken keepers such as Liz Barbour and Frank Hyman. They recognize that chicken owners don't have to choose between permanently locking their birds inside a run and surrounding every single vegetable bed with another fence. Instead, you can create a secure wire corridor running along existing fences and garden boundaries. To construct a 50-foot chunnel, you begin with a roll of 3-foot-high, 14-gauge welded wire fencing coated in black vinyl. That black coating matters because it makes the fencing far less visually noticeable, helping the finished tunnel blend naturally into the landscape. Start by cutting the wire into 3-foot sections. Fold the edges outward to create 12-inch predator-resistant flanges on each side that lie flat against the ground. Then bend the center portion into a dome approximately 18 inches wide and 16 inches high. That creates enough room for normal-sized hens to walk, run, peck, and scratch comfortably. To strengthen the structure, attach arches made from 1/2-inch black sprinkler tubing to the inside using zip ties. Then secure the ground flanges using 6-inch U-shaped landscape pins. Cover those edges with stone or soil and connect each tunnel section to the next. Once the chickens start using it, the results become obvious. As they travel through the chunnel, they eat weeds, grass, and dandelions, attempting to push into your property along neighboring fences. They also intercept ticks, grasshoppers, beetles, and other insects before those pests ever make it into your vegetable garden. And the tunnel can become more than a pathway. You can transform it into a living salad bar by growing trailing nasturtiums, cucumbers, or zucchini along the outside. As those plants grow, their leaves and flowers spill over the wire. The chickens gain access to free, nutritious organic snacks throughout the day, while the plants form a naturally cool, shaded canopy during hot summer afternoons. It's a simple, affordable project that can completely change the way backyard chickens move around a small property. Part 6. Rotational paddocks and the grazing frames. If your goal is to maintain permanent grass while still giving chickens regular access to fresh pasture, the next system combines rotational paddocks with grazing frames. Rotational grazing means dividing a larger pasture into smaller sections, known as paddocks, and moving your animals between those sections according to a planned rotation. But that rotation isn't simply controlled by the calendar. It depends on the condition and height of the forage. A basic pasture management rule is simple. Take half and leave half. You allow the chickens to graze the vegetation down to roughly 3 inches, then move the flock before the plants are completely destroyed. Leaving enough leaf growth behind allows the plants to continue photosynthesizing and recover strongly before the chickens return. There's also a simple formula for estimating how many paddocks you need. Take your desired rest period, divide it by the number of grazing days in each paddock, and then add 1. So N equals rest days divided by graze days plus 1. For example, if the pasture needs 30 days of rest and the flock spends 3 days in each paddock, you would need 11 paddocks. During the rapid growth of spring, cool season pasture may require roughly 21 to 30 days to recover. If your birds stay in each paddock for 3 days, at least 11 paddocks gives the first area enough time to recover before your chickens return. During the hot summer slowdown, however, pasture growth becomes slower. Recovery might require 45 to 60 days. That means your rotation needs to become larger, or you may need temporary electric netting to create additional paddocks. For sheep, goats, and poultry, a rest period of at least 45 days can also be important for health, because it helps interrupt internal parasite cycles by allowing worm larvae on the pasture to die before the animals return. But what if you don't have a pasture at all? What if you only have a tiny backyard with around 100 square feet of chicken run space? Release 9 hens onto that small area, and they can turn it into a barren moonscape in less than a week. So how do you keep something green growing inside such a confined run? The answer is grazing frames. Popularized by garden writer Vern Nelson, grazing frames are basically protected raised growing areas made from rot-resistant cedar or redwood 2x4s. Across the top is heavy-duty half-inch galvanized hardware cloth. 1x2 cross braces installed about every 2 feet help support the mesh against the weight of chickens walking on top. Place the frame directly over seeded ground. Water the area and allow sunlight to stimulate growth. As the grass develops, the blades grow upward through the half-inch openings. The chickens can jump onto the frame and clip off those fresh, tender tips. But because the roots remain protected underneath the wire, the birds can't dig them up or scratch the soil apart. The plants survive, the soil remains protected, and the flock gains a continuous, self-renewing supply of fresh, vitamin-rich greens, even inside a very small enclosed space. Part 7. Compost 2.0 Feed Integration and the Amish Secret. Now we need to talk about one of the biggest expenses in backyard chicken keeping, the feed bill. Most people treat chicken feeding and composting as 2 completely unrelated jobs. Commercial feed comes home from the store. Meanwhile, vegetable scraps, kitchen waste, weeds, and garden leftovers get dumped into a separate compost pile where they may slowly decompose for months. But in a connected homestead system, that compost material should feed the chickens first and then feed the garden afterward. Instead of relying only on a stationary compost pile, create a dedicated scratching pen. Start by covering the floor with approximately 8 to 10 inches of dry bedding. That bedding can include chemical-free wood shavings, dry leaves, and straw. This is the traditional deep litter approach. Then, every day, throw your kitchen scraps, vegetable peelings, garden weeds, and grass clippings directly into that scratching area. To us, these materials may look like waste. To chickens, they can look like an enormous buffet. Chickens are natural scavengers. They dig through leaves and scraps, searching for insects, larvae, worms, and anything else edible hiding inside. And while they're doing that, they become living compost turners. Their constant scratching helps aerate the material. Their manure adds nitrogen, and their activity speeds up decomposition. After roughly 6 to 8 weeks, that mixture becomes dark, rich, partially processed organic compost that can go directly into garden beds, all without you constantly turning the pile with a pitchfork. This is also the philosophy behind the legendary Amish approach to feeding chickens for only $1.25 per week. The Amish don't rely completely on the commercial grain model. They understand chickens as omnivores, designed to consume a broad variety of insects, vegetation, scraps, and other foods. Grain is simply one part of that diet, and one way they stretch that grain while improving nutrition is through fermented feed. Fermenting chicken feed is extremely simple. Put your normal cracked grain or feed mixture into a bucket. Cover it completely with clean water, then allow it to sit for 2 or 3 days. During fermentation, beneficial lactic acid bacteria develop in the mixture, similar to what happens in yogurt. This improves gut health, strengthens the immune system, and greatly increases nutrient absorption. There's another advantage. As the grain absorbs water, it expands. The chickens feel satisfied sooner and may consume as much as 1/3 less feed overall. Combine fermented grain with daily kitchen scraps and access to fresh pasture forage, and the difference can become striking. The birds become healthier, their feathers look smoother and glossier, and their eggs develop rich, vibrant, deep orange yolks. Studies show that pastured chickens eating a diverse diet rich in insects can produce eggs containing twice as much vitamin E, considerably more omega-3 fatty acids, and stronger shells. Egg production can also rise by as much as 15%. Part 8. Scaling up and overwintering. The running gear egg mobile. But what happens when the property gets larger? Suppose you have 3 to 5 acres and want to expand from a backyard flock to 50 or even 100 laying hens. At that scale, efficiently controlling where the flock moves becomes an entirely different challenge. That's when the running gear egg mobile becomes the next step. The egg mobile, a concept made famous by Joel Salatin, is essentially a large, fully enclosed chicken house constructed on top of a heavy-duty agricultural trailer or hay wagon running gear. Our version measures 8 feet wide by 12 feet long. It sits on a rugged 10-ton agricultural running gear and can be pulled across the pasture using a compact Kubota tractor. The greatest advantage of the egg mobile is its ability to combine scale with efficiency. The floor is largely open and constructed from heavy-duty hardware cloth. Just as with the chickshaw, chicken manure falls directly through the floor and onto the pasture underneath as the mobile coop changes position. Instead of creating another manure cleaning chore, the system distributes fertilizer directly across the land with almost no extra labor. Inside, V-shaped ladder-style roosting bars provide enough space for as many as 100 hens. At the rear of the structure is a roll-out nesting system. When a hen lays an egg, the egg rolls forward into a protected collection compartment. That keeps the eggs clean, prevents chickens from pecking or eating them, and allows a large number of eggs to be collected very quickly. The egg mobile also includes a solar-powered automatic chicken door. At sunrise, the door opens automatically. At sunset, it closes and secures the flock for the night. That means predators are kept out without requiring someone to walk across the pasture in darkness every morning and evening. But anyone raising chickens in a northern climate eventually asks the same question. How do you use an open-floor egg mobile through a freezing, snowy winter? It can be a challenge, but the solution is surprisingly simple. Before strong winter weather arrives, move the egg mobile to its winter location. Then bring in roughly a dozen tightly packed straw or hay bales and stack them around the entire outside perimeter beneath the trailer. Those bales form a solid insulated windbreak, closing the open gap between the ground and the trailer floor. Inside the coop, the walls are tightly covered with plywood, and the ventilation openings are sealed using foam weather stripping. Together, those measures allow the collective body heat of the chickens to keep the interior warm and protected from drafts. At the same time, the surrounding straw bales prevent freezing wind from blowing upward through the mesh floor. The result is a flock that stays protected, comfortable, and productive even through the coldest part of winter. Conclusion: from expensive chaos to managed abundance. At the end of the day, successful homesteading isn't about working harder. It's about designing the system so you can work smarter. Allowing chickens to roam anywhere they choose may feel like the easiest and most natural way to raise them. But on a small property, unrestricted freedom can become expensive chaos disguised as simple homesteading. The chickens damage your soil. They destroy your garden. They keep your feed expenses high. And they trap you in an endless routine of repairing the same damage over and over again. But once you begin building a connected system, the relationship completely changes. Maybe that system begins with a simple chicken tractor moving across your vegetable beds. Maybe it's an almost invisible channel running along your fence. Maybe you add 2 grazing frames inside a small chicken run. Or perhaps your flock moves across pasture behind a mobile chickshaw. Whatever you choose, the goal is the same. You stop fighting your chicken's natural behavior and begin directing that behavior toward useful work. Instead of becoming an exhausted chicken keeper constantly cleaning up damage, you become a strategic poultry manager controlling when and where that energy is used. Your flock becomes safer. Your soil becomes richer, your garden becomes more productive, and your feed bill can fall dramatically. So take a good look at your own property. Of these 7 managed movement pieces, which one would you build first? Would you start with a chicken tractor? Would the chunnel make the biggest difference? Or could a couple of grazing frames completely change your current chicken run? Tell me in the comments below. I read every one, and I always enjoy hearing how other people are building and improving their homesteads. And if this video changed the way you think about free-ranging chickens, subscribe to Farmyard Care, turn on notifications, and share this video with another chicken keeper who is tired of fighting the same free-range problems. Thank you for watching Farmyard Care. Stay close to your land, keep your flock safe, and we'll see you in the next video.